I'm Helene from the Danish Institute for International Studies, or DIIS, here from Copenhagen, Denmark. And I'm extremely honored to welcome you to this webinar titled Sensing Myanmar, Exploring Violence and Resistance. And I welcome you on behalf of the organizers DIIS and Dignity. We're very pleased to see so many participating today in what is really an acute and very important topic of discussion. I also want to hugely thank our distinguished speakers and panelists who have agreed to join us here today in our conversation. And we will be presenting you just before you go on to speak. And also a huge thanks to my colleagues, Andrew Jefferson, Thomas Martin and Susanne Kempel, who is part of the organizing team for today. This webinar marks and mourns 1 year of military coup in Myanmar, which for a lot of people has been a devastating year. But it also marks 1 year of incredible and pervasive popular resistance to military rule. Every day I continue to be deeply impressed by the strength of the Myanmar people in this pursuit. So I will say a little bit about the program today. Following my short words here, I will give the word to Andrew Jefferson, who will introduce the webinar and talk a little bit about the background of the topic and of holding this webinar. We will then move on to a keynote speech by Sayaji Mohan, and this will be followed by a Q&A session. And then we move on to a panel with speakers, which is moderated by Susanne Kempel, who will engage in a vivid conversation about resistance and violence in Myanmar since the coup, but also some of the historical legacies. And on this panel, we have Lian Sakong, we have Mahatida, we have Tin Shunlayi, and we have Liv Gabaritz. And then finally, before we close off, we have asked Nick Cheeseman from Australian National University to reflect on some of the conversations and some of the points that are raised during today's webinar. And a little bit on practicalities. I know that most of you are by now used to being in Zoom webinars, but I would still just like to address a few things. We would like you to ask questions in the Q&A function rather than in the chat. And you can do this along the way, but the questions will be addressed during the Q&A sessions, as you can see in the program. And everyone will be able to see the questions, but there is a possibility to ask questions using the anonymous button if you don't want your name to appear in the Q&A. And otherwise, I wish you a really good webinar. I look forward to hear the presentations and the discussions. And with these words, I give the floor to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Helena. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. It's really a privilege to be able to introduce this session, an event that marks for us the ongoing struggle for recognition, for democracy and for justice in Myanmar 1 year since the military coup. And since then, we know, as Helena mentioned, that violence has increased dramatically in intensity, in visibility and scope, and that various forms of orthodox and unorthodox resistance have emerged in response. So this is our topic for today. So let me first say welcome also from me. My name's Andrew Jefferson. I head a research project called Legacies of Detention in Myanmar that explores the changing nature of relationships between the state and its people through the lens of imprisonment. By looking at how judicial and penal practices have been used in the past and today, we seek to cast light on what might be changing and enduring in Myanmar. And the coup obviously tragically highlights the integral role that violence plays in this process. I work at Dignity, the Danish Institute Against Torture, which is a rights-based, knowledge-driven development organization seeking to eradicate torture and other forms of violence and to support those who are subject to it. We aspire to a world without torture, work with other like-minded organizations around the world in pursuit of that goal. And we're very pleased to be able to co-host this event together with DIIS. And I thank Helena for the opportunity. I'd also like to thank in advance Susanne Kempel for moderating the conversation later, and to the DIIS conference crew for facilitating this event and helping us to advertise so broadly. A word of acknowledgement too to the anonymous Myanmar photographer whose vivid image we used in the promotional material, and to the Danish Foreign Ministry's Research Council, who funds our research project. The Legacies research project is ethnographic in nature, which means it's attuned to voices from up close rather than afar. Through research collaborations, we've sought to generate field-based knowledge through which to understand and sense Myanmar. I mention this because it also informs the content and the style of this webinar, not least the title. Sensing Myanmar was a title we originally gave an online essay series that we initiated just after the coup, an attempt to put into words our struggles to make sense of the coup and its aftermath, its meanings and its effects, and to register our solidarity with the people of Myanmar during this new crisis. This webinar reflects that ongoing struggle and restates that gesture of solidarity in the face of ongoing injustices. Of course, we're aware that recent atrocities are part of a much longer history of violence in Myanmar. Today, we'll be exploring the exercise and experience of violence with a focus on the forms of violence that the coup has accelerated and the responses to violence that have emerged. There's no doubt that the coup and its aftermath have featured a range of forms of violence. State terror has been manifested in killings, beatings, torture, arrest, detention, as well as in the illegitimate undermining of the electoral process, the concoction of trumped-up charges against lawmakers, and the revision or making of laws designed to criminalize dissent and shore up the fake legitimacy of the coup makers. The military have sought to naturalize their claim to power through disinformation, through inflated claims about their own capacity to control, and through displays of blunt and brutal force. Through tactics of intimidation and repression, they've sought to reorganize politics, derail the nascent democratic drive, and subjugate the population, with rather mixed results, I think we can say. Political constellations have been reconfigured. New alliances have been formed. New visions around federal democracy have been forged. The drive for democratic and people-led politics has not been extinguished, but instead ignited in new ways. Communities have refused, in fact, to be subjugated. So rather than military-led order and control, we see disorder, disaster, and crisis. Rather than the quelling or quashing of dissent, we've seen the emergence of a range of forms of resistance: civil disobedience, silent strikes, marches and protests, digital and artistic expressions, the reorganization and reconfiguration of democratic representation in the form of the NUG, the NUCC, as well as assassinations, acts of sabotage, and organized armed struggle. And we'll be learning much more about these today. Via a lively dialogue, as Helena mentioned, between engaged conversation partners. And as Helena, I'm delighted to have such an array of distinguished participants today. This webinar seeks to make sense of unfolding events and their effects. We begin with a short keynote address exploring the armed resistance since the coup, with a particular focus on institutionalized forms of violence. So with these words, let me repeat my welcome and give the word back to Helena to introduce Mohan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for this introduction. And now I'm really, really pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Sayaji Mohan, whose talk will be focused today on the armed resistance since the military coup, which is one part of the elements of resistance that Andrew was mentioning and that we will be talking about today. Just a few introductory words. Mohan is currently a fellow in the Asia program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington, D.C. And he went there due to the coup, because prior to that, he was the executive director of the Tagaung Institute of Political Studies located in Yangon. And prior to that, he was also part of establishing the Yangon School of Political Science, which a lot of you here may have known of. And he's also provided significant technical advice to the peace process in Myanmar prior to the coup, especially in regards to security sector reform. And he's done extensive research on civil-military relations in Myanmar and transitional politics as well. And since the military coup, Mohan has been very active in publishing in international media and also reports looking at the armed resistance, looking at soldier defectors and other topics of relevance, including the international role or rather lack of action in the current situation. So I'm really, really pleased that you agreed to come here today and start off the webinar with a keynote speech. The word is yours.
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me? So I really glad and pleased to be invited to this webinar. So alo minglawa. I want to start my keynote speech with one of my own experience. So at the time of the military intensifying crackdown on the peaceful protester in late March, one of my younger brothers who had not been back home since the coup returned home late one night. He then actively organized several anti-coup protests with his university friends. The last time I saw him protest in downtown Yangon around the late February, he was at the time, very active and enthusiastic. But now, when he came back home, so he looked feeble and depressed. When I asked him what happened and how's the situation, he sorrowfully replied to me that one of his friends was killed by the military and 4 other friends has disappeared. He continued that, brother, we already tried all the possible peaceful means to restore democracy. Frankly, we didn't hope that the military will be such cruel and brutal. We have no other options. And we already decided to take up arms to fight against this inhuman, brutal militaries. He says, I believe armed struggle is the only option at our disposal to restore democracy and to put an end to the military dictatorship. Now I came back home to say goodbye to my family. Since then, the family has no chance to meet him in person again until now. So I think my brother's determination is not simply his own, but a reflection of the collective state of mind of the day. As we all know, the anti-junta public resistance started immediately after the coup with peaceful protests and non-violent civil disobedience movement. However, it was soon confronted with extremely brutal repression from the citizen. So international community calls it the Tamil Bats, and now the people in Myanmar call it Sitet, the armed forces. The younger generation, particularly those from urban areas who came of age after reform began in 2011, were eventually driven towards the unexpected conclusion that peaceful resistance by itself cannot restore democracy. So in this way, the Sitet brute force terror campaign catalyzed the peaceful anti-junta movement's metamorphosis into arms resistance. So in order to resist the Sitet terror campaign, I think on May 5th, the CRPH appointed National Unity Government NUG formally announced the armed resistance with its formations of the People's Defense Forces, PDF, to fight a bad against the winter. Since then, the PDF primarily, we can say primarily located, locally formed militia groups, especially drawing from the EAO, ethnic armed groups, trained youth, has been mushrooms across the length and breadth of the country. According to sources close to SEN PDF and NUG, the total number of PDF is, I think, is approximately over 500. When we developed a list of the PDF, which has manifest themselves in one manner or another via self-proclamations, media statements, and interviews. There are at least 453 groups across the country. However, I think that the list is not exhaustive. There's other PDF which we have not collected data. But even now, according to our statistics, there's 443 groups across the country. So most PDF are township level militia groups, and their size range from large groups comprising several hundred personnel to small cell or 2 or 3 dozen individuals. So far, the estimate number of the PDF, I think that it is around 25,000 personnel. The number appears to have expanded as the initial volunteer passed their business military lesson on to other young activists, and more young people joined the struggle. So according to some sources, there's over 16,000 personnel of the PDF across the country. So we can see that a lot of proliferations within a short periods of time. We can see how much, especially the young people, they feel very grievance, and also they feel very and hate against the military winter, and also how much they are motivated to restore democracy. So we can see 3 types of PDF now in the countries. The first one is the PDF in active coordination with the existing ethnic armed groups in their fight against the military, mainly in Chin and KR regions. The second one is the PDF for which are autonomously operating in some of the heartland Burma areas such as Sagaing and Magui. And third is the urban guerrillas working underground in urban cities such as Yangon and Mandalay. So I think it is undeniable that the PDF represents a new type of security actor in Myanmar's current security context. Contrary to the early prediction that the PDF would gradually dwindle in its uphill battles against one of the largest military in the regions. But now that they became more stronger and more organized over time, they are currently conducting a variety of operations, including ambushes, skirmish, bombings, sabotage of military-related facility, and business and targeted assassination. And also, some PDF have also joined forces with EAOs in sophisticated operation against them militaries, primarily in ethnic areas such as Chin, Kaya, and Karen State. Some of these PDF have been under the operation and control of the local EAO, and some are under the NUG, and some are very autonomously operating. And also some are certainly equipped and end by EAOs. So my study of the PDF found that during the short periods, over time that their PDF, other PDF have steadily matured into more organized formation. For instance, the intense fightings has impelled some PDF to systematically expand into several battalions within a short period. The second point is the PDF have been most successful with a hit and run strategy against the cumbersome temporal formation in rural areas where they can meld into the often friendly population. The third is that cooperations is also strengthening PDF and improving their combat effectiveness. That is more obvious in Sagaing and Kaya, where coalition buildings and coordinations amongst the various PDF pose serious challenges to seated troops. So the fourth is the shift in combat tactics, such as increasing use of landmines, and things that it inflicts heavy casualties on the Hunters troops. So recent photo and video footage of the PDS also demonstrates that the Sanford had acquired more advanced weapons weapons such as machine guns, RPG launcher, and artilleries. Although it is in limited number. Due to restrict access to weapons, SAM's PDS has been set as a numerous weapons workshop in their own areas, especially relying on local blacksmiths, and they are able to successfully produce a wide range of arms from makeshift rifle to the launchers. So far, most equipment comes via black markets in Thailand and reportedly sent from China and Laos. Also, some EUs have provided amendment support to the PDF located in area in close proximity to their areas of operation. Although these first are promising, there's also several challenges for the newly founded PDF. Among them, significant challenge. I can see two significant challenges there. The first one is the all anti-wander M crews have not been integrated under the unifying command structure. So far, attacks on wander forces has been significantly rising throughout the country, but and I think the NUG did not seem to have been in overall command. It seems that the PDF are operating independently, and NUG is still trying to set up a coherent commands and control structure. Most was not operationally coordinated beforehand by the NUG and instead organized autonomously by local commanders. Frequent coalition meetings and coordination amongst the various PDF sites. I think the NUG's MOD have not been to bring together the sprawling PDF under the unifying command. Based on our findings, an estimate 40% of the PDF are under the command of the NUG, and 30% have cell links to the NUG, but the 30% operate independently. Without a formal command structure, it will be a daunting challenge for the disparate PDF and various PDF to overcome the institutionalized military, and thus it ran the risk of being withered down one by one over the course of the year. It is one of the challenges. The second challenge is that the NUG and the PDF have no reliable access to large number of arms and heavy weaponry or countermeasures to Tamil air power. So even yesterday, Tamil launched an airstrike in Cognizant in northern Shanxi. So I think the PDF lack of heavy armament hinders their ability to take and hold territory. Although they are acquiring small arms, I think there is most of the small acquisitions of small arms is relatively manageable along Myanmar's porous border. But I think the heavy equipment is not readily available. The PDS also lacks a means to effectively counter the military's air power. This limitation makes it increasingly difficult to retain control of seized territory. Taking advantage of this weakness, the military has been deploying a steady barrage of airstrikes against the PDF. The problems will only continue to plague NUG and PDF because while they have the potential to seize rural areas along the borders, they will struggle to take any of the strategic area in the country center without a countermeasure against the military heavy equipment and area power. So from a strategic perspective, the PDF disunity and the situation in which the EUs are reluctant to fight together with PDF across the whole country, hence give the military a distinct advantage that offsets some of the winter's poor tactical and operational performance by allowing the military to concentrate mass in each theater. Currently, we look at the conflict hotspot. We can see 5 main fronts. They are the first one is the Chin state, where the CNF, Chin National Front, and also the local CDF are very active. The second is what we call the Anya battle zone. So it's the Upper Burma battle zones, including Sagaing and Magui region. The third is Kachin state, where the KIA, Kachin Independence Army, is predominant. The fourth is Kaya and Karen states in the east along San Fissions of the KNU and Karenni National Progressive Party, together with the local PDF are fighting. And number 5, the Northern Shan State, where Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, NDA, and its Northern Alliance are fighting to gain control of territory. In all of these fronts, the military has been engaged in fierce fightings with the local M crews. I think that they have to deploy a lot of troops. Moreover, the winter thought it is too risky to take out the troops deployed in Rakhine State despite territory ceasefire. According to my editor, there's still over 60 battalions still deployed in Rakhine State, although there's the temporary ceasefire. And this battalion exit the total number of battalions deployed at Sagaing, Magui, Chin, and Kaya, while the fighting intensifies now. I think the military has been very worried of the Rakhine State, although there's no fighting now. Similarly, it's deploying more than 70 battalions in northern Shan states, where it is fighting against we can see the China and war supported northern groups. So confronting these groups across the country and continuing major deployments of troops to the main city to separate dissents has been, and things that overstretches the winter forces. And its troops' morale may take a hit. With my interview, according to my interview with the SAM soldiers, so they have not been taking a rest for years since the coup. Because they've been deployed at several places. And things normally they have to take a rest after 6 months of operations. Now I think that they are more or less, especially rank and file soldiers, the morals of the rank and file soldiers are very dramatically declining. I think that especially due to the prolonged periods of operations. And also another one is that they are not sure why they are fighting. It's also one of the questions that they always consider. So we have no idea why we are fighting against different M groups. So now that's the immediate strategy of the Tamil is the first to control the key urban centers such as Yangon, Naypyidaw, and the Mandalay is their first strategy. The second strategy is to circumscribe the hotspots where the PDF are very active, such as Sagaing, Chin, and Kaya, with the intention to crush the PDF before monsoon seasons. The third strategy is to contain the ethnic areas by reaching out to the ethnic M groups for peace negotiation. That is why I call it the 3 C's. The first C is to control the key urban center. The second C is to circumscribe the hotspot and to crush the PDF before monsoon seasons. The third strategy is to contain the ethnic area by reaching out to ethnic M groups for peace negotiation. Now that very recently they announced the peace dialogue, calling for peace dialogue. So, and then as far as I know, so far they have not been launched the large-scale offenses as some observers said, because their troops are very overstretched across the country. So they could not take out a number of troops from Rakhine and Northern Shan State to intensify their operation in Sakai, Makwe, and other areas. Because they know very well that Rakhine and Kokan is, it's a real threat to their to their control of territory. So, and things that therefore military mainly defines tactics of. So, firstly, so I think they based SAM troops in area in order to surround the PDF base. The second, the controlling the main routes, the key areas, and cutting off the logistics supply of PDF. The third is the raiding and banning SAM villages and arrested villages, and in certain area where the PDF are very active, clearing the village and driving out the villagers. The fourth tactic is using many airstrikes to attack the PDF base and civilian area in order to undermine the morale of PDF and villagers. So the military leader know very well that if they are not able to recapture some areas currently under the control of the PDF and EAOs before the monsoon seasons, so I think that they will lose those areas during the latter half of the year. So they thought before, I think the operation before the monsoon season is very decisive and it's also very important. After that, they think that PDF and EAO will gain strong control of those areas. So I think that they were intensifying the offenses in coming 3 months. Now, its call for peace dialogue with the EAOs in Union Day is to contain the ethnic armed groups in order to suppress the PDF. I think that there will be intensifying fightings especially in all 5 fronts that I mentioned before in coming months. If the military can get some sort of tacit agreement with the EAO, they were more focused on Anya Tirida, Ababama Tirida, especially in Sagaing and Makwe regions. So I think that they will be using more airstrike. According to my statistics, since October until now, there has been more than 15 airstrike, 50 airstrike across the country. I think they are preparing to use it more in coming months. So I think that in the current situations, the military's key concern is about the coordinated attack by the EAOs and the PDF across the country. And the general knows that they find it difficult to handle it. So when these kind of coordinated attack came out. The recent fighting with Arakan army and I think several casualties of the soldiers. At first, I know shot the Nipido. So I think there's around 7 soldiers, including the 1 official, died with the fightings against the Arakan army during I think 2 or 3 days ago. But here, the question is that such coordinated attack is possible in the near future. I think that it is a really important question. So I think that despite some progress, the NUG PDF and EAOs are still struggling to achieve the political and military agreement to launch a coordinated attack. I think that such agreements could be a game changer. But in the current situation, I think a coordinated attack is still far off, and small-scale fighting will continue. If the situation continues in this way, I think the conflict will become more institutionalized, and the country will be trapped in broad threat conflict in which nobody could achieve a final victory. So, and in the near future, I think the small-scale fighting continues. I think the conflict will become more institutionalized. So it is my assessment of the current conflict dynamics. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mohan, for this really in-depth and reflective talk about the armed resistance, and also your reflections on the military and their tactics. There are some questions in the Q&A. I also have a few questions to add, and of course the participants are very welcome to pose some more questions. We have about 20 minutes for the Q&A. I will group some of the questions as well that fit together, but I will start with a couple of questions. The first is, you've also written about it. We have other participants here who have engaged with it. How do you see military defections, but also internal forms of disobedience affecting the dynamics that you are talking about? Another question that comes up here in the Q&A is the armed struggle right now the only way to reach democracy? And the person asking the question is also saying this is very different from the non-violent approach of Aung San Suu Kyi. So I guess we could add what is different now, like what is the scenario now? And the third question for this round is what positive results have we seen of the PDFs right now? Because your prediction for the future is kind of a continued conflict, but what are the positive moves or points that you can identify so far?
Yeah, the first questions regarding the defections, I think that we have to talk about the current situations of the military. So as far as I know, so as I said before, the morale of rank and file soldiers has been dramatically declining. So I think that even officers have not felt safe any longer. So I think that the size of the military has been decreasing since the early 2000s. Most troops don't have a full strength. So despite estimations of the military strength around 350,000, in fact, the total number is less than 200 soldiers. Among them, the combat force are around 18,000 or 90,000. So moreover, the military has faced a recruitment shortfall. I think the chronic undermannings, as well as a heavy casualty in fightings with ethnic groups. The recruitment will have more limitation in the future because the current resistance movement has been very active in 3 key areas that the military always depends on for recruitment. It is Upper Burma, Chin State, and Rakhine State. And also, I think according to my studies, normally the desertion rate is very high in the military, and in this years, I expect that it will be more. So as far as I know, most rank and file soldiers don't want to fight anymore, and they decided to remain in the military as that they have no safe place to go. So the military is just taking. And also another thing is that military is just taking hostage of their their family members. So, and also, I think as the senior officer are afraid of the massive defections, desertions, they strictly control the military personnel and their family. I think now the soldiers and their family are required to live in military base, only permitted to live with permission from their superiors. So in the current situation, due to the limited capacity, I think for the defections, the first one, so most of the rank and file soldiers, they want to defect, and also they want to desert. But the first problem is that they have no safe place to go. The second problem is that I think most of their family members remain inside the military headquarters, military battalions. They don't have chance to get outside. So I think I think for the defections is very highly likely that more defection will happen in the future. But the most important thing is the safe place to create for them and also for their family members. Without creating the safe place, I think it's really difficult for them to live. So I think safe place is really important to convince more defections and desertions. It is my answer to the first question. For the second question is that I think that people trying all the means for the non-violence demonstration and non-violent protest. So even now, that all the people actively participate in the silent strike, and also all the people actively participate in contributing to the revolution. So they donate a lot to the PDF. So I think that people believe in the non-violence peaceful protests, but that they confront with the, as I said before, the brutal terror campaign, and also very deadly and also brutally cracked down by the by the militaries. Most of the young people, they came to the conclusion that only M resistant is the only option for them to fight back against the winter. So now that's I think in the best, in my perspective, in the best, Aung San Suu Kyi carried the flag of the non-violence protest. So the people believe in her. So at the time in 1990s, there was the M resistance movements initiated by the ABSDF, but it failed because they didn't get enough support from the public, and also they didn't get the enough support from the international community. Now there's the people's disillusion with with the only strategy, non-violent strategy can bring the first, that's only non-violent strategy can bring the democracy back. So although they believe in the non-violent strategy, they will participate in any means of the protests and also dissent against the military. But they also believe the armed struggle is another option. They have to support to put an end to the military dictatorship. I think that the changes of the people perception is really important. In this movement. The further is my second question. For the third question is that I think so in the current situations, in the past, the military thought they can control, especially after the coup, they can control very easily the public resistance in the urban areas by using force. So that's why in downtown areas, even in our quarter, we heard the military's soldiers always shouted, "Who dare to die?" So if you dare to die, then please come out. We are ready to kill you. So but now that's the situation is really totally changed. So now the people's, especially the PDF, they are. Especially in sand areas when the fighting occurs, they ask a similar question to the soldier. So I saw the video footage in KR state. So when the local PDF attacked the military battalions, so I think the soldier did not come out of the battalions at night. So I think that the PDF shouted, "If you dare to die, please come out of the battalions." So I think that's the key impact, positive impact of the PDF is that now the calculus of the military generals is changed. In the past, their main focus is how to control the situations. So they thought, as they said repeatedly, that they thought they can easily control the situation. Now it changed. Now they are considering how to survive in these challenging situations. I think they are more focused on to survive amongst various resistance. I think that it is the positive impact made by the PDF. So it changed the it changed the calculations of the military generals.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are running a little bit out of time because you have given so extensive and thoughtful answers. Thank you so much for that. So I'm just going to try and group, and unfortunately you will have to answer a little bit shortly, but because we have only 5 minutes left, but I'm sure the issues will come up later as well. So there is one link to the international role and also the EAOs, ethnic armed organizations. There is the question of China, the role of China in relation to the decisions made by the ethnic armed organizations in terms of agreeing to go into this peace dialogue with the Tatmadaw. Or we could also ask it reversely, the role of China in EAOs joining the armed resistance. That's one key question. The other key question linked to the international is, do you believe, and here I quote the question, that the PDFs can win without military support from the US and the UK? And the last question linked to the international is, what role do you see now of the UN Special Envoy, also regarding the latest statements on power sharing?
Yeah, the first point is that I think that China, in the past, China always provided blank check support to the military rule. So especially before the 2010s, they provide a blank check support to any power holders. But now that I think that it changed a lot. China didn't give the blank check support to the winter. So they want the stability restored in their border, and also they want the stability be restored in the country near to to their country. So I think that China's the position is totally changed, but I think that they take a wait and see approach to the current situation. If the military, the winters, they are able to control the situations, I think that China will be ready to give more support and also to give the legitimacy to the winter. But now that China knows very well, the current winters, the current military leader are not competent to restore stability in Myanmar. So that's why that they take a very wait and see approach. So I think the China main concern is the stabilities. So I think it's really important to give the message to the Chinese to send a clear message that the winter, the military is not the force of stability, but it's a force of chaos. So Beijing's support for the winter is abetting the atrocity and instability that ran counter to China's interest in the longer term. So I think that message can change China's China positions. But now, at first, I know China takes a wait and see approach to the situation inside the country. So they are hedging it best. The second question is for the international communities. I think that the PDFers, I think that without support from the international community, and also the even without moral support from the international community, the PDF they survive, they fight against the military winter for a long time, even now. So and also within the years, as I said before, everybody, most of the people, especially the academics, expected that they can dwindle over time because most of the PDF are not organized. So they are women's scallies organized by the young peoples who frustrated with the military's actions. So they were disappear over time. But now that even after years, they becoming more stronger. They're more organized. We can see it very clearly. So I think that it is really, but as I said before, that there are strengths and also more organizations. That's not means that they will win the final victory. over the military, but they can survive. So I think that without the international support, so especially from UK and US, it's really difficult for them to launch a countermeasure to the military. But I think that they will fight all those the international community won't support to them. And think that they can survive in the current situation. In the current situations, I think that the period before monsoon seasons is really important for the PDF. If they can survive after monsoon seasons, I think that they will be more stronger and they can take some control of territory. So for the special envoys questions, I think that she should, the situations is totally different from the previous scenarios and things that we can see in 1988 and also we can see in 2007. So now that the people repeatedly shows how they don't want the military winter in their country. So we have already seen in silent strikes, and also we have already seen the people's contributions and support of the PDF and also the people's revolutions. So I think the international community and also the mediators, they should know more about the situation on the ground. So they should make more analysis. So I think the previous approach is not enough. If they didn't change their approach to the crisis in Burma, I think it will be very difficult for them to actively involve in this process, and so they have to change their approach for the Burma crisis. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for answering these questions and also for your keynote speech. I hope you can hang on here a little bit. Now we're moving on to the next panel, and I won't say any more, but give the word over to you, Suzanne, and ask also the panelists to turn on their cameras, those who are participating, and Mohan and I will stay in the background.
So welcome to the next session of this webinar, which will be a conversation about violence and resistance in Myanmar. My name is Suzanne Kemble. I'm an independent anthropologist who's worked in Myanmar for the last 25 years. Among our distinguished panelists, we have His Excellency Lian Monsekong, who is the Minister of Federal Union Affairs at the National Unity Government of Myanmar, also known as NUG, and Vice Chairman of the Chin National Front, CNF. We also have Mafthida Sanchaon, medical doctor, writer, human rights activist, and former prisoner of conscience. She's a visiting associate at the Council of Southeast Asian Studies at Yale University. Then we also have with us Liv Gaborit, who's a postdoc in social anthropology at Lund University, an activist and spokesperson for the Myanmar Action Group Denmark. Her current research is focused on political imprisonment and the resistance movement in Myanmar. She has previously written her PhD about experiences of imprisonment in Myanmar as part of the Legacies of Detention project, which was mentioned previously at Dignity. We also have a fourth panelist who unfortunately has had to bow out in the last minute due to a security issue. I have a short message from her that I will read later. The fourth person is Thinsa Shunleyi, democracy activist and advocacy coordinator of Action Committee for Democracy Development. She runs a public advocacy campaign at Pidu Pandain, also known as Former People Soldiers, and is a founder of a global campaign for women's solidarity with Myanmar called Sisters to Sisters for the Revolution. Thinsa Shunleyi is unfortunately not able to participate at this time, but as I mentioned before, I will read out a short statement from her. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for finding the time to participate here today. I would like to ask a first question, because much is happening in Myanmar, but violence is not new to Myanmar, neither is resistance to it. Is there anything at all new about the form and violence we have seen in the last year and the responses to it? And I would like to ask Mafthida Sanchaon to begin.
Thank you, Susan. Well, you know, we haven't seen all the violence throughout our history. You're right. But now we have seen the violence is more cruel, you know. The real big difference is the violence against the ordinary civilians. No discrimination at all, no discrimination based on race, gender, religion, anything. The military makes such a brutal, inhumane violence against any civilians, you know. That's the biggest challenge. And the response, of course. In the past, you know, a lot of the people who suffer, they became victims, or they just became the internally displaced people, or they left the country. But right now, I think the biggest challenge is the armed resistance, you know, the response, you know, the changing. We never ever think there will be like a big fight against the military, especially from the Burma majority in Sakai and Magui division. This is very hard. You know, recently I saw a picture, you know, the military has been set the whole village on fire. And with the remains of their homes, the villagers just make a new slogan with the as a protest, saying that you can burn our village, but you cannot burn our morality and the art. So here we are, they just show up as a protesters, you know. So this is the very unique response from the civilians, you know, against the military. I think this time of this moment in our history is very unique in terms of the very cruel violence from the military and very creative and determined resistance from the civilian.
Thank you for your response. Lian Mung Sukong, are you with us? Kindly turn on your camera and your voice, please. Okay, welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you for taking the time. You have been involved with resistance in Myanmar, the political process and the military for many decades now. What do you see is different now? And what do you see is a continuation of prior periods of violence and resistance?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here. I think this is very important seminar, and this is important time as well. So as you said, I have been involved in this movement, this struggle since 1988 as a student. So in 88, our struggle was mainly for a democratic change. We students demand for democracy, but it was brutally suppressed. And then since then, you know, our struggle is continuing till today. And then from 1988 to 2010, our struggles from outside was to consolidate what kind of the union we would like to re-establish in the future, and which obviously is based on democracy and federalism. And that demand actually is not a new demand, which was the foundation for our union. When General Aung San and ethnic leaders signed the Panglong Agreement, tomorrow will be 25th anniversary actually. So 75 years is very long time. But in these 75 years, we could not fulfill or implement that agreement. The main agreement, the main purpose of that agreement was in Panglong Agreement Article 5, which demand for a federal system, a union, where all the member states of the union could enjoy our internal self-determinations and self-administration. That was our main demand. And then Article 7 was about democracy. So the Panglong Agreement, in Panglong Agreement is what we envisioned for the future. The purpose was building a union based on a democratic system, and then internal self-determination for all member states. But as we all know, this never has been fulfilled till today. And our main struggle is for that one. And if you look at 88 movement, the one that we emphasized very strongly was about democracy. So our slogan in 88 was mostly about democracy. But, you know, the country needs not only democracy, the country also needs a federal arrangement, because our country is multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. In such a situations, democracy alone is not enough. Federal arrangement where member state of the union, as well as all ethnic groups, should be given their own fundamental right, as well as their internal self-determination, which is very important. So this is two dimensions. We cannot build the country based on only one dimension, because Banglong Agreement demand for both of a democracy and a federal system. So in 88, we were not successful because we emphasized only one sided of the demand, which was democracy. But my hope in this Spring Revolution is that the demands from the ground, from the street, from all over the country is that now is a federal democratic union. Even federal come first. So our demand now is both federalism and democracy, federal democratic union. So I think this is where in 75 years of our history, this is the time we are totally united in terms of our purpose, what kind of the union we are intending to build, we want to build, and then it's go back to 75 years. In 75 years, where at Banglong Conference, where General Aung San and Chin Kachin and Shan leaders signed Banglong Agreement, that was what they dreamed for. That was what they envisioned for. That was what they wanted to build a country. So I think these spring revolutions, 2021 revolutions, give me a big hope that this is our demand is united here. And then, as you also mentioned, I involved in the peace process from 2012 to 2020, just before the military coup. So at that time, I representing 12 ethnic groups, ethnic organizations, as main of the negotiator, because I was at the Union Peace and Dialogue Joint Committee, UPDJC. I was one of the vice chairmen representing ethnic arms organizations. So at the UPDJC was the chairman was from the government side, Aung San Suu Kyi, and then there were three vice chairmen, one from EAO, ethnic arms organization. It was me, and then one from political parties and one from the government. So what I'm trying to say is that during all these years, in 8 years, we have demanded, we made a lot of proposals to rebuild our countries based on that democratic and federal principles. But we could not get that principles. We could not get it. In 5 years, what we get was not important principle, just a minor principle. Every time we propose our principles based on Banglong Agreement, based on our struggles, but all the times military rejected, military blocked all the way. And eventually they came to power. I think the reason that they came to power is that in those processes, especially after 2019, when Aung San Suu Kyi made clearly her principle that she was for a federal democratic union. She proposed 5 federal principles on the 28th of October 2019. That was based on all the ethnic groups, our demands in 2005, and then which was what we proposed at the first Union Peace Conference in 2016. I myself presented that principles, and my presentation was based on 8 principles. And Aung San Suu Kyi agreed on 6 principles. The two was already implemented, multi-party democracy system and protection of minority rights. So it was the time ethnic arms organization and Aung San Suu Kyi, our principle was similar. We came together, we were united, and that made military very nervous. That very evening, they were talking already about kind of the military coup, how to prevent it and so on, in front of us, in front of us. So that was a kind of things that I think, in my view, Min Aung Hlaing and his regimes, his military groups, they took over the state power, claiming that it was the fraud of election. No one believed it. But in my view, they wanted to prevent the peace process, which was almost successful. The last round of peace conference in August 2020, we were very, very close. We were very, very close. So, and then NLD1, a landslide victory. And then if we could conduct another round of conference, and where Aung San Suu Kyi principle and ethnic principles are similar, then they realized that in such a situation, military have no future. Military have no future. Under the democratic system, under federal system, military have no future. I think that was what they wanted to prevent. So that is why they took the military coup and then such a violence. I think our previous speaker mentioned about atrocity that they have been committing and all these problems. So I think what is different, what is new? I think armed struggle in Burma started in 1949, especially from ethnic side. So it's more than 70 years of struggle. So this armed struggle is not new. But what is new is that in all these years, only non-Burman ethnic groups were holding arms and fighting for democratic principles and federal principles. Well, there were some insurgent groups like the Burmese Communist Party, but they were not for democracy. They were not for federal system. They were for communism, communist system. So that was the difference. So, but now, after this 2021 Spring Revolution, that we call it, in this, all the Burman and ethnic groups are united. We have never seen such a unity in our history. And then all the Burma from central Burma are also holding arms and fighting against PDF, People Defense Forces. And then People Defense Forces and ethnic arms organization, we are uniting ourselves now under NUG government. And then our previous speaker did not mention about how we are, united between ethnic arms organization and NUG's PDF. We form kind of military alliance, and then what we call is C3C, command control and coordination teams, which is, and then I think we are forming most of the countries now, but I don't want to go into details, which is our military strategy, and I don't want to reveal in such an open panel. So I think we are united. What I'm trying to say is we are united. Yes, the military regime has been preparing themselves for so many years in terms of how to fight, how to make violence, brutality. This is their expertise. But we are just the people, ordinary people. Because we don't like such a dictatorship, such a military regimes, we are now in this situation. So I think we will win definitely. And I think we are united. And then this kind of unity we never have in our history. That is what I would like to say right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lian, for that very in-depth response. I'd like to look at a slightly different level, and this is a question to Liv Gaborit. You've been working with, we now talked about the brutality, both Lian and Mathilda has talked about the brutality of the current response. You have spent quite a few years working with prisoners, both before the current coup and also at this time, you're also in contact with people who've been in prison. What shift do you see when you speak to them? Is there any difference to their prison experience in previous times and now?
There's a lot of similarities that have been carried on over history in the prisons of Myanmar and in the torture methods. But there is also a difference right now. Some of the people that I've spoken to, they're shocked to see how brutal the torture is. They are shocked to see how many people are tortured to death. Some of the people who shared their own experiences, they told me that when they were tortured, they would never be kicked in the face. Mostly they would be tortured in places where it could not be seen. So they would be tortured on the parts of the body that was covered by clothes when they went to court. So there's a different kind of brutality. It's not like it's a completely different kind of torture. It's more cruel, it's more brutal. It seems like the torturers right now expect impunity. And there was beginning to be a shift in the prisons toward prison guards and prison directors actually expecting that if they did treat their prisoners wrong, then they would risk consequences. And that risk seems to have completely disappeared right now. And that means that the security forces are free to do what they want.
Thank you. Mathilda, you've spent time in Myanmar prisons in the past. At the same time, you are a writer, a journalist, and both writers and journalists have a quite key role in Myanmar history and also in resisting violence. Now we have a time where there's been a shift to a more violent response. How do you see the role of writers and journalists? In other words, what is the role of the pen towards in this fight against the sword?
Well, right now it's a little bit hard to see who's doing what because of the a lot of people who decided to live inside the country facing a lot of the security issue, That's why a lot of the writers, they do their best, and you can see more than 3 poets has been killed during the revolution, and a lot of some poets, they left for the liberated area and they took arm and they make a resistance. They keep doing, and but there are still a lot of journalists. They also have been more than 100 journalists has been arrested, and a lot of the TV channels and the print media heads, they lost their license to practice, but they keep running from the neighboring countries. They do their best for informing the people, So right now, I think the information is also very crucial role in this revolution. And that's why I think even in terms of the armed revolution, we wouldn't believe the local people defense forces will win some battles because they have no experience, no actual weapon, nothing. But what they have is information, the informations from the ground and information's network through the media. So that's very much like the role of the pens, in this revolution, even in the armed resistance. But I think a lot of the writers still remains with the non-violent resistance. They prefer this. And I think the spirits of revolution is mainly through the literature, literary talks, and the media, throughout the history. If we look back to the even after 88, since after 88, even when the very, very heavy censorship and the propaganda was going on, the writers and journalists were pretty much never give up in terms of informing, interpreting, and reaching out to the people, what is wrong, what is right, how we should see, and giving people thinking of the other alternatives, for example, like the federalism and democracy. It was pretty much banned vocabularies throughout the history for so long, but not saying directly using these vocabularies and the words, we were writing a lot. According to my experience, I have been writing a lot without explaining what is federalism, without using the terms federalism, without using the term democracy. I have been explaining what is federalism. I have been writing about what is democracy, something like that. So I think, the roles of the pens is still going on, and it's still, that's not much very obvious on the surface, but I think it is one of the root causes of maintaining the revolutionary spirits among the civilians.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that. Myanmar is much more globalized today. People use Facebook. There's also a lot of sort of citizens, reporters. This globalization, or this internet revolution, how does that make this struggle, or this resistance, different, both for the people but also for the writers today in comparison to earlier movements?
I think this time is more obviously the very dual resistance, armed and without arms resistance. In the past, there was also armed and without arms, but that was no integration between the armed and without arms resistance. But this time, I think armed and the non-violent resistance has been pretty much very smoothly combined and integrated. So that's why the Spring Revolution itself is very different. And on top of that, as you said, a lot of people are using social media and familiar to the technology already. So that making more easier to break through some boundaries, reaching out to the far remote area, news from them, and the voices from those people who live in the peripheries. It's now far more available to the people in the center. That's why, in terms of the agreement on having the Federal Democratic Union, it can be easily made. Otherwise, it's very, very hard in the past because of the lack of the knowledge, because of very heavy censorship and very heavy propaganda. Ineffective education systems make every person's not understanding each other, not understanding what do we really need, something like that. That's why I think the technology and the digital platform also making us break down the barriers of reaching out each other and having the integrated version of the revolution between the armed and the non-violent resistance quite smoothly. So that's why, even though some people don't agree the armed revolution, but they keep doing their part, the non-violence revolution, the non-violent resistance, even though the armed revolutionaries, they think this is the only way out, but they still appreciate. That's why you can see in Sakai division, especially in the areas around Monjua, the youths started having the big rally and the public talks, encouraging people to join the non-violent revolution. Why the armed people defense forces are taking guards, taking the protection. So it's very pretty much combined, even though they took arms for the revolution, but they're still encouraging the ordinary civilians to have a non-violent resistance. They're not asking them to join the armed resistance because they know the role of the non-violence resistance is still very crucial for making the revolution success,
Mathilda, you talked a bit about the advantages of the internet and of a more globalized world also in Myanmar, of it being easier to reach far-flung places. I would like to bring in Liv here, because while the internet is also a way to unite people and people's resistance across the country, it's also a way to distribute violence. There's psychological warfare taking place both from the side of the military, and the resistance is also engaging in using the internet. So Liv, I wonder if you could comment on what are some of the impacts on local people with being exposed to violence, both in their everyday lives in the streets, but also through the internet.
Yeah, well, of course, it's quite hard for the mental health of people in Myanmar right now. Like, most people are living constantly under risk. It's hard for people both when the communication is cut off and they have the uncertainty and don't know what to be afraid of, but they know that violence is all around. They know that civilians are targets as well. It doesn't matter whether you participate in the resistance movement. You can't even hide in your home because your home might as well be burnt down. But then on the other side, we have all the information that is being shared, which can both be useful, but can also be harmful for the mental health of people. We've seen a lot of documentation shared online about the killings and the torture that has taken place in the streets. And this is, of course, very good documentation for later court cases and for documenting and showing the world what goes on. But this can also be used as psychological warfare, and we've seen that in other contexts in the world as well. So I've been quite inspired by all the visual arts that we have coming out of Myanmar, and also the pace at which it comes out. The day after, the hour after an event has taken place, you can find some kind of visual art representing it. And this visual art often goes viral online as well. And some of these visual images are actually ways to share the information, but in a less traumatic way. I first used some of the art in my presentation of the resistance movement after the coup and was asked whether I was beautifying the coup. And at that point, I wasn't sure what role the art played. But at this point, after having watched all the images of the violence that happens to the people of Myanmar, I realized that the images are also a tool for me to be able to communicate to the world what is happening without having to do trigger warnings and without having to have some people look away because it's too horrible. The image kind of mediate the violence in a way where it is something that people can deal with seeing without being directly traumatized by it. So these images have many purposes.
Thank you. Lian Mongskong, I would like to revert to you and some of the things that was discussed earlier. You stressed that what was different this time was that there was a focus on federalism and democracy, not simply democracy. And there was a strong unity and hope that you hadn't seen in the past. For decades, there has been a lack of trust between some of the ethnic nationalities towards the mainly Burma-driven democracy movement. And also at this time, there's been some reluctance among the ethnics to support the NUG and join the wider resistance. Can you mention a bit about how that is playing out, what the main challenges are, and how you're trying to bridge this divide?
Well, thank you. I think one thing that I was not able to mention in my previous round was that in this struggle, the reasons that we have seen a new movement, not only ethnic groups and the Burma coming together and fighting against the military regimes, and then the tactics or the strategy that we employed in this struggle is Not only one. And that means not only armed struggle, we still engaging demonstration on the ground. And then CDMs, I think non-cooperations, all the workers not working under this military council. So I think we have employing various tactics. So we could not say that this is only armed struggle. This is also non-violent struggle. People also engaging in many different ways. So the purpose is to, we cannot accept anymore this military dictatorship. I think this is very obvious. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, some of the, you might say that some of the people, ethnic groups are not trusting the Burma, or Burma not trusting ethnic groups and so on. So I think this is partly the rhetoric, and I think people are enjoying this kind of rhetoric instead of looking at the hard reality. The hard reality that we are developing in this struggle is that here we are now establishing what we call is National Unity Consultative Council. That National Unity Consultative Council is where all the groups from very many different backgrounds are coming together and working together. I spent most of my time since last May, and then until very recently, on the 29th of January, we just finished our assembly, People's Assembly. And then all these weeks and months, we spent every day, at least 5 days a week, every day, 3 to 5 hours a day. And then where many different backgrounds from ethnic groups, religious groups, and political parties, elected MPs, and civil society as organizations, ethnic arms organization, ethnic based organization, various groups, 28 stakeholders coming together for all these months. And then we have developed what we call is Federal Democratic Charter. First, the process itself was what, if you look at from outside, it was very frustrating because it's too slow. For a certain point to agree, it took weeks. For a few pages of agreement, it took months. But in our history, 75 years of our history, such kind of dialogue never happened in our history. This is where all many different stakeholders come and engage and develop our future together. And then we adopted Federal Democratic Charter. That charter is our future. So I must also mention that, in the past, from 2012 to 2020, 8 years of peace talk, we proposed so many proposals. We proposed many principles, but we did not get. But those principles all are now agreed as Federal Democratic Charter. So this charter will be our future. And then if we will be able to implement that charter as the constitution of the future of Myanmar, which we must and we will be able to do, I'm fully confident because I see the unity of the people. So I think based on that charter, we will be able to rebuild our country. And then this unity, non-disunity, I don't think this is a reality. Yes, some of ethnic leaders who are seeking for their own personal benefit, maybe such kind of people will always be in history. And then there are such kind of military regimes who try to join ethnic groups and such. Min Aung Hlaing himself now, he is proposing a kind of peace talk with NCA group. But NCA was for what? NCA was for peace talk. And then that peace talk for what? It was to change 2008 constitution. And that 2008 constitution is no longer accepted by the people. We abolished already. So what is the purpose of political dialogue or peace talk based on NCA? Military regime is still talking about NCA, which is already meaningless. So I think there are a lot of new reality happening. International community and Burmese observer should looking at the hard reality. The hard reality. So what we are really doing, maybe it is not obvious yet, but I think, for example, I must tell you two things. Number one, this charter is our future, where we have adopted democratic principle, federal principle, what kind of union we are going to establish. That principle is based on Panglong Agreement and so on. So I think this is very important. So I think I'm going to stop here. Perhaps you see me, I have putting two telephones. So I think, thank you so very much. I become like a little bit of machine now, and then we will win. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Leon. That was a very hopeful prediction for the future of Myanmar, talking about the unity of the people, talking about the bridges that are being built between especially the ethnic groups, the ethnic organizations, and the democratic movement. I would like to hear both from Liv. You mentioned before some of the resistance in terms of art, but I'd like to hear from you, Mathida. What are the types? We talked also about armed resistance, but in terms of the peaceful resistance, there's been many different kinds. What are the most creative forms of resistance that you've witnessed or heard about? And what expressions of resistance have really moved you?
Well, there are so many indeed, you know, especially during the early part before the armed resistance are pretty much creative, you know, creative way to express every single point of their dream, their foreseen huge the country, something like that. So I cannot say the particular one right now, but there are really so many ways of the protest. You can see the kind of the Tanaka protest, or the protests especially for women, and protests without people, or protests. There are so many kind of this kind of the very inventive, innovative protests, but at the same time, you know, there are so many new music and MTV that's also keeping the spirits of the revolutions warming up. And I think the poster campaign, the arts poster campaign and exhibition, the photo exhibitions, they are also pretty much creative in sense of the literature, you know, so many good poetries has been come out, and we recently published the Picking of New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring. This is the anthology of the resistance and revolution-based writings since '88, but especially focused on the Spring Revolution in 2021. So there are a couple of other book projects and the documentary TV projects. So it's tons of the creative expression, but including one is, you know, also in Sakai division recently, we do have from the Burma majority group, they are also Buddhist, and they do have a novice ceremony, you know, making the kids at becoming the temporary novice. And it's a kind of the rally, you know, walking on the streets of the villages and the cities with the pretty much well dressed. The ceremony, people bringing all the goods to the monastery. So they are all on the streets, making the traditional way of the novice ceremony, but they all using the flags of the revolution, and they all use the three fingers gesture, so it's a combination. They cannot stop, life's going on, even though it's a kind of the middle of the civil war or middle of the resistance, but life goes on. So they keep people, the resilience of the people is really lovely and very creative in my sense. This is the very creative performance, not by the artists, but simply by the ordinary people, using making their own daily life and traditional things, the cultural things go on, but with the essence of the revolution is in it. So I think this is how even though the things inside from the eyes of the outsider sounds very much negative, but for those who live inside, it sounded like, okay, whatever happened to us, we are here. We will survive. We don't care. Our determination is already made. So only one thing it's, I think, if the military, if they make up their mind, they need to focus on the rule of law, and the impunity should be handled. Otherwise, the people, the resistance of the people will be it will goes on, even though they at the same time they won't stop their lives. They will still live their lives, but they won't stop the resistance. That's the biggest challenge, I think, biggest challenge so far for the military. They know only the brutal and militant way. They know only the crackdown. They use at uttermost of their strength already, but the people prove them, even though you make our life miserable, but our lives is go on in this way. So this is the biggest strength and the significant gesture against the military.
Marthida, you're talking about, and Leon too, but especially this question for you, Marthida, about the people. Can you explain a bit about the role of, for example, women in the resistance movement?
Sure. I think the women are now more having more confidence about their role. On March 8 last year, there was a big event, our surround our flag, something like that. So that's was pretty well received by a lot of ordinary people, including men and the older, especially older generation. So I think this is very good sign. But at the same time, since from the very beginning, role of the woman, the very first big rally has been organized by women, young women. So I think the role of the woman in the NUG, role of the woman in CRPH, role of the woman in NUCC, also, prove how much their capability and their commitment to the revolution. At the same time, during for the armed revolution, there are several other women took part in the armed revolution too. Not just as the fighter, but also the medics, as the medics, or the logistic supporters, and also a lot of women becoming the organizers for having such a big funding and the donation. So I think the role of the woman, it's never been suppressed, never been actually oppressed by any means. It's going on, and it's also very firm and it's also, yeah, sure, it's also the continuing process. This is not, it cannot be stopped, you know.
And likewise, Liv, you're in contact with many young people. Many of the artists are also younger, not all of them. How do you see the role of youth, of young people in Myanmar, both especially in resisting the military takeover?
Yeah. Well, I think generally what's interesting in this time is that a lot of the social structures that were so firmly in place before are now up in the air, because we don't really know what rules to live by, what norms to live by. So just like the role of women can change, so can the role of younger generations. So I think it's very encouraging to see, for example, that the NUG also have representatives of the younger generations. Because one thing is to talk about the unity across ethnicities, but it's also important to talk about the unity across age, and to include everybody. And the younger generation, they play a slightly different role because they've grown up while Myanmar was opening, and like they've lived defining years of their life in what was very close to a democracy. So they have a very strong spirit, and they don't want to go back to the world that Myanmar was when they were children, and the world that their parents can tell them about. So they have a strong spirit, and they bring hope and energy to the revolution.
And on this note, I would like to finish this session with a few words from Finsa Shunlei, who was supposed to be with us today, but who could not be here. What she says about violence and resistance in Myanmar is, she says, I would like to talk about the culture of violence heavily embedded in the society. The soldiers' brutal acts also reflect how they were treated inside the military too. I was raised inside the military, and I have witnessed brutal acts against each other. The high ranks were given the impunity and the privilege to torture and arrest any soldier they don't like. Many were brutally tortured for change of commands or trained to kill, or otherwise they will be killed. Finsa Shunlei has for many years been a very strong youth advocate in Myanmar too, and these were some of the words she would like to pass on to us. What will happen now is we will have a 10-minute session, intermezzo, by one of my colleagues who will talk about the role of art in Myanmar. And then we will continue with questions and answers to the panelists. So those of you sitting out there, wherever you are, feel free to post questions in the chat forum, and we will revert with the three panelists after these 10 minutes. But for now, I would like to thank His Excellency Lian Mung Sukong, Mathida, and also Liv Gaborit.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I think this is where I will take over. Thank you for such a very rich and diverse panel. While we review the questions and organize the Q&A, we'll take a few minutes of your time to acknowledge the crucial role that art has played in responding to experiences of violence in Myanmar. It's something that Liv Gaborit stressed quite strongly in her interventions, and it's been widely recognized that Myanmar artists had formed a significant front line in the fight against the junta in powerful ways. But before we dive into this, an example of this, we should also remember to register the tremendous blow that the coup has been to the artist community in Myanmar. While struggling with the challenges of the COVID pandemic, Myanmar artists had to face the compounding crisis of the coup that quelled creativity even further, causing dread and loss. And in the long tradition of military persecution of art and free thinking, the coup put the Myanmar artist in imminent danger. And it's well known, as Martita was also noting, that vocal and protesting artists have faced the challenges and lost their lives in the process and been detained, silenced, or forced into exile, or have had to go underground. Yet those artists who have had the opportunity and energy to push back, often at high personal cost, have struck an imaginative nerve with great power. And Myanmar artists have taken to the streets and to the internet to help processing the resistance and to express communal feelings and experience in deep and effective ways. They have released a formidable burst of creativity that has encouraged many others to forge ahead, not least in the early days of the massive peaceful protests. While skilled artists spearheaded this creative movement, it is indeed also significant how Myanmar people from all walks of life participated in mind-blowingly artistic expressions of resistance. People created revolutionary art with their bodies and the materials of everyday life by dressing up as Batman, by banging pots and pans, or by hanging up their dresses in the magnificent Tamane activism around Women's Day in 2021. Art raised awareness, it raised funds as artists sold their work and donated the sales to CDM, and it helped raise people's hearts and hands in three-finger salutes. Art have both encouraged defiance and called for action, and often pushed the new potentials of ethnic and gender equality in Myanmar forward by linking current manifestations of violence to legacies of racism, nationalism, and patriarchy. And art has offered consolation, reminding us that life prevails and evolves despite the violent onslaught. This is not a new role for Myanmar artists who have a long history of critique despite censorship and persecution. Yet researchers and practitioners note that Myanmar artists have become more blunt, visceral, and explosive, leaving behind tradition of expressing critique in quite coded form, something that Martita also noted in her writing on democracy and constitutionalism. Still, a layered and humorous feature of Myanmar art seems to be very much alive. I'll share my screen to illustrate this. We'll give just one, but a strong example of the many intensely engaging artists that continues to deepen our understanding of ongoing violence. And we are proud to share a few pieces of art by the Myanmar artist we see here. Bart Was Not Here. Bart Was Not Here is a young artist whose work has been exhibited widely in Myanmar and abroad, and who has been a frontrunner in creating a deeply personal, political, timely, and poignant response to the crisis. Bart Was Not Here was at home in Yangon in the midst of developing a new sculptural dimension to his passionate and lyrical art when the junta usurped power last year. And as the dangers of making art spiked, he took an opportunity to go to Paris as an artist in residence. Bart Was Not Here could not join us today, but he was enthusiastic about our seminar and kindly offered us to show some of his work and read some of his artist statements that follow his paintings. The examples of Bart Was Not Here's art that we present here today is drawn from a series of digital works that he calls Seeing Red. I didn't make a lot of digital artwork before February, Bart Was Not Here writes about the series. But most of these works had to be made digitally while I was in Yangon during the early days of the coup, so I could just delete all of them rather than throwing away the physical evidences. After I left Yangon, I kept protest artworks on my iPad. I guess it became a habit. Seeing Red is a collection of my favorite 2021 Burma-Myanmar protest artworks. The title of the series is in itself strong, connoting the angered and uncompromising resistance, the bloodshed, the color of the democratically elected government, but also the history of censorship in Myanmar, where the use of the color red was seen as deviant and defiant by the art censors of the military dictatorship. As Bart Was Not Here wrote to us in an email, he sees the series as a timestamp of the period of after the coup. Tellingly, the first piece of art was his powerful graffiti-style painting, Disobey, from 2nd February, accompanied by the caption, "To our public workers and people in civil service, we see you, we are with you all the way till the end. Disobey, we are bigger than them." The artwork went viral and was picked up and repainted as tags, republished online, reprinted on posters and t-shirts, and projected on the walls of Yangon by the ingenious art group 100 Projectors. A few weeks later, as the strikes picked up and the pressure increased, Bart Was Not Here produced the digital painting Gods and Prophets on Strike. The gods and prophets had to speak up since all the rich and famous Burmese religious leaders are silent, he wrote on his Instagram account. Go to heaven, don't go to work, the text bluntly reads, while also paying tribute to the three-finger salutes and the pots and pans protests. As the army's atrocious attack on the protesting public was fully unleashed, the art of Bart Was Not Here darkened. On 3rd March, when the protester Angel was killed, he released this artwork. And as the fighting intensified, so did Bart Was Not Here's response. On 18 June, he published this painting with the caption, celebrating the explosion of a military truck at Tamway. 6 fascist soldiers die. We will drink to that. This culminated somewhat with this piece called Omen from 7th September, after the defensive war against the junta was declared by the NUG. Seeing Red is a vivid and visceral series. It portrays the darkening trajectory of the coup and the revolution in Myanmar in engaging but also very disturbing ways, while embracing public sentiment with humor, rage, and empathy. Some of Bart Was Not Here's pieces in the series are more layered, like this one, Dancing on Your Grave, that Bart Was Not Here describes as a love letter to all urban guerrilla brothers and sisters sacrificing their lives and taking the risks to disrupt the military junta's chokehold and protect the civilians from giving in to the absurd pressure applied by the junta. The cherubs are holding homemade hand grenades and posing like the Asian mythical creatures Kinari and Kinara, Bart Was Not Here explains. Kinara is also the symbol of the Karenni state, he writes, which was going toe-to-toe with the military soldiers in May and June. They were fighting thoroughly, even though they had no formidable weapons whatsoever. And Bart Was Not Here continues. The hair of the cherubs are brunette, but they are visibly turning gray because all the urban guerrillas that are carrying out the operations and dealing with highly explosive materials are young people who stood up for their freedom and the future of our country. They were doing everything a normal 20 or 30-year-old would do, enjoying their lives, full of endless possibilities. The system before the coup never offered anything solid for us, but we always managed to make something out of nothing. Now most of the youth can't even dream of having a stable career anymore. It's all about surviving at this point, he writes. Nobody deserved this life. This is why these baby angels are depicted with their hair turning gray. So we let Bart Was Not Here's own words and his logo end this short presentation highlighting the role of art in our efforts to understand experiences and responses to violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, for the interesting art and for the comments on them. We're now moving over to the Q&A session for the panelists, where we have a number of questions for those who are participating. So I'm trying to find out which are most relevant and to ask them to whom. One of the questions which I would like to ask to you, Marthida, just so you can answer from your perspective. How does this, now we have this violent resistance to the military takeover in Myanmar, how do we avoid that continues and that turns into pure cruelty? What kind of institutional, emotional, or legal measures need to put in place to avoid that?
Well, you know, as a doctor, if we see the diagnosis, we just need to get it off the cause of the problem. So the root cause is the military. So the get rid of the military or the making the military giving up all the atrocities will be the most effective way, you know. Otherwise, there will be still never-ending atrocities, you know. So that's why we keep saying the impunity and the rule of law, it's very much important. So in institutional, I think the institutional problem with the military is, as everybody pointed out, it's never been a proper institution whatsoever, you know. The top military leaders abuse its own, the low-rank officers, and low-rank officers abuse soldiers, something like that. And the recruitment for the military, it's I can say the two way. One is for the officer level and one for the soldiers level. So both are not very healthy style of the recruitment. That's why I think the military itself, it's as an institution, it's still struggling. So when the international community think of the military and its role in our politics, it's pretty much not reaching out to the reality on the ground, because the military, it's had so much, weapons of force. But even for this, even though they say they own this, they own that, but I think the very serious corruptions involves. So that's why I'm not sure about their actual capacity to use its budget in the effective way. Most of the military budgets has gone inside the pockets of the military leaders already. And the military officer levels, their aims of going into military, it's more like having a high rank officer post at other ministries. Their objective is not defending the country, nor working as military officers forever. Their target is having a hiring officer at the municipal or at the tax revenue office, something like that, having money. And then recruiting soldiers level, since nobody really loves military for ages, So a lot of the unemployed, drunkard, or the having the family problems, or all sorts of the not good people, I might say, some criminals has been recruited as soldiers into the military. That's why I think the institutional weakness of the military is itself is making all the problems. So if we need to heed this, the target will be not just to the opposition, but also to the military seriously. Otherwise, that's why I think the whole country believes we cannot go forward with the current military for the longer run. So the aim of the general public right now is not just want the military no more its role in the politics, but also they cannot accept military as it is now. It is a very dangerous combination. It's like a organization of not just terror, but also the organizations of the corruption, organizations of the all pretty much people without any goodwill.
And Mathida, if we turn the view towards the armed resistance, how do we avoid that they replicate some of the brutal methods of the military? It sounds like from our earlier speakers, or at least from Mohan, that he expected this the armed struggle, especially the PDFs, to go for some time. And that poses question about how do we avoid that Myanmar becomes fully violent? What measures need to be in place for the resistance movement, especially the PDFs, to function in a way where they resist, but where they don't act out cruelty?
Well, my answer might be very ambitious, but without the third-party security force presence, we cannot make any improvement. That's why I think the role of the international community is very important. As long as the whole international community acts, just make lip service statements, there will be no end of extrajudiciary killing from both sides. That's why I always prefer to have the transitional justice. Even I never ever think the last decades, for me, it was not transition. Now we seriously do need think about we going to having through the transition from now. So the transitional justice. So I think not just the NUG, NUCC, CRPH, they also making establishing code of conduct for the PDF, but it is not enough, I know, because on the ground, the problems of the PDF, you know, is the, as Ko Yam Yo mentioned, it's more than 400. And for the NUG, they never ever ask any particular group to set up the PDF. They just ask generally, and most of the PDFs are voluntary, you know, and then some PDFs say we won't follow the steps of NUG, we are on our own, you know. So we just join the already established the armed revolutionary organization, ethnic armed revolutionary organizations. We have our own mission, something like that. So how can the NUG itself making their code of conduct established with this very independently practicing local PDF, something like that, you know? So that's the problem. So that's the root cause of this kind of the chaos is depending totally on the handling of the military, you know, until and unless military cannot stop impunity and the making the atrocities against the civilian, how can we stop? You know, we cannot stop. That's why I think if there is only one thing, and that's why I think general public has been calling for the responsibility to protect for us from the international community, and we calling for the ICC, for ICC, so many other ways the international community can make effective action, not just the statement and sanctions. So I think the last weapon for the international community might be seriously thinking about changing the global coherent strategy and then making the third-party security forces on the ground. Otherwise, the extrajudiciary killing from both sides cannot be stopped easily.
Thank you. I'd like to read to you, Liv. You mentioned previously the mental trauma that a lot of people have been exposed to, and you've worked with political prisoners for a long time. Acknowledging that you're a social anthropologist and not a psychologist, what do you feel is needed for some of this mental trauma to begin to heal?
Well, first of all, I am a psychologist.
Okay.
So that's a place to start from. But I'd actually like to go back to your previous question about how we break this circle of violence. I think, first of all, we need to recognize that Myanmar is in a civil war and cruelties take place in war. So to expect that we don't see any cruelties performed by the resistance movement, be it the ethnic armed groups or the PDFs, I think is simply unreasonable. And if we look back in time, if we look back to '88, there were also cruelties. We saw beheadings, we saw security officers who were dragged after cars. But often we don't speak about these. And the general approach to them by Aung San Suu Kyi has been to leave the past in the past and move on. And I think we need to go about this differently, both for the reconciliation and the future of Myanmar, and also to deal with the mental trauma. I think we need to recognize that wrongdoings will take place. Some will be justified. Some might not be justified when we look at it from the outside with an objective view, but might feel justified for the person who is in the middle of a desperate situation. So we need to look at these wrongdoings, we need to talk about them, and we need to do proper transitional justice to address them and leave them in the past. And this will both help the victims and the perpetrators, and the victims and perpetrators are in these situations often also the same people. So I think actually addressing the issues and not expecting this to be a fight between good and evil. There are good people in the military, as we see with all the people deserting because they don't want to take part in this military coup. And there will also be bad actions performed by the people fighting for the good cause of the revolution. So a more nuanced understanding and a recognition of this, so we can speak openly about it, and we don't have to hide the wrongdoings in the past and pretend like every person who joined the resistance movement has to be a hero that is 100% good. They are heroes because they fight for the right cause, but even heroes have to perform sometimes harmful and cruel actions.
Marthita, what is your response to that? Do you think in Myanmar culture, maybe not at the moment, but in a future Myanmar, that there will be the space or the interest to talk about the cruelties or the mistakes that may have been committed by those who will be seen as heroes? Or do you think there's more tendency to look to the future?
Well, right now it's pretty hard. I cannot say the exact answers because I cannot reach out to a lot of people, you know. How we can reach out to the people is just through the digital platform, and it is not enough to judge how the majority of people look at the extrajudiciary killing. So for me, is transitional justice is my favorite topic all the time. During the last decade, I have been writing a lot and talking a lot, and I know not many people, even from the oppositions, agree or support this idea because, as the Liv said, they also more or less once the committed some sort of the bad or mistakes, something like that. So, but if we really want to have a peaceful society, and if we really want to have a very successful transition, we need to go through the transitional justice. You know, without claiming the justice, we cannot make everybody safe in the society. You know, if we talk about the beds, it's not just the military. There are some supporters. They still do support the military for so many reasons, and we need to seriously think about. We cannot kill every single person. You know, it's not the way we can make our transition. You know, so that's why we do need to. That's why I keep from the very beginning. I keep writing. You know, from the very beginning, my very first post I posted in my page under my name. You know, at that time I'm still in Yangon. You know, it's a resistance with loving kindness. And a lot of people criticize me very, very badly, you know, why we use loving kindness, you know. So it doesn't matter. I keep writing this because I do believe in order to have a peaceful society in the future, we need to behave from now. You know, the methods should be very careful about taking care, not just for the destination, but also for the process, you know. So it won't be very popular right now, but of course, you know, by times people, if they have time and condition to reflect the past and the present, they will agree. You know, people are not that violent right now because of the very harsh atrocities, so many brutal atrocities they have been witnessing or experiencing. Their tolerance is pretty much changed and their responses are very hot right now, but by times people will make sense. That's what I believe, because, you know, as we all witnessed in 88, you know, it's very illogical for me to just forget about what happened, you know, but people easily forget. It's not just Aung San Suu Kyi. I think I mean the public easily forget about what happened in 88. That's why we ended up, you know, in this very bad structure of violence till now, you know.
Thank you, Marthita. I'd like to say to those listening, and also some of you have posed questions, especially to Lian Mong Sukong. He has unfortunately have to leave the panel due to another meeting. And as mentioned previously, things are Shunlei Yi is also had to leave the panel. I'd like to ask you, Liv, before we end, is there any issues we haven't touched upon? Any things you find very important that you like to conclude with?
Well, I'd like to also focus on the sacrifice that those participating in the PDF are actually going through. One of my friends who went to get trained so he could support one of the PDFs, when I met him in Yangon some years back, he was a vegetarian because he did not want to take any life of any being. And now he's been trained to be able to fight in armed battle and to kill other human beings. And I think that's quite a good example of how big the sacrifice actually is for those who take up the armed struggle because it's necessary. And I think we need to remember that, because often when we discuss the armed struggle in forums like this, we tend to discuss quite abstractly whether nonviolent actions are better than violent and whether it's really necessary to take up arms. But I think we need to remember the sacrifice that those people who engage in the armed struggle are giving, and that they are doing so not because they want to, but because they see it as a necessity and because they see no other way out. So we need to recognize that this is one part of the revolution and the resistance, and thankfully there are many parts. We also have the CDM and all the creative contributions and the online activism. And we need all of them for the revolution to succeed.
And Mafida, is there any topics we haven't touched upon, issues you find particularly important, or final words that you have for our viewers?
Well, I think we need to get rid of the identity politics, for the international community. Also, I think your funding, your support should not make the divide based on identity, any identity, and the mutual respect to each other in individual level is pretty much important to end all the atrocities. That's why I really wish the democratic value and all the basic human rights should be respected whatsoever. You are on the good or evil side or something like that. The basic principle should be basic human rights for any individual, not based on any identity. Until and unless we cannot make this goal and aim has been reached, we cannot have a peaceful society. So it's very challenging, but of course, we won't give up.
Thank you, Mafida. We'll end this session with a poem reading by Mafida, but first I would like to thank you, the speakers we've had. So Lian Mungsukong, who was with us previously, Liv Gaborit, and now over to you, Mafida. Thank you for the time you've taken out, and thank you for your wise words. We'll end with a poem reading for this session.
I chose this poem because I want to salute for the fallen heroes. Some people with or without any political ambition, So once is written by Lenwei A. The title is Mausoleums. When this spring is over, there must be a mausoleum in every village and every town. There is no neighborhood fire. This is civil war. This is not about a flat and a car for a family. This is about 60 million people, their right to live like human. This is not about a new division. This is about a whole new state. Even when you peel onions or pound chilies, tears may trickle down your cheeks. Revolution is not a walk in the park. Every country of dignity has to fight for their own freedom. In our new state, in every village and every town, there must be schools, hospitals, religious buildings for all sorts of worshippers, theaters, concert halls, and opera houses for working people, parks for children, and gardens for lovers. Above all, when the spring is over, in every village and every town, there must be a mausoleum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathilda. We're now a bit ahead in the program, but I'd like to hand over to Nick Cheeseman for a discussion on some of the key takeaways from the whole debate today.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And I'd just like to begin by paying my respects and appreciation to all of the presenters in today's discussion, but above all our colleagues from Myanmar who have just expressed, I think, so thoughtfully, but also that combination of thinking and feeling, which is so critical for assisting all of us through what's happening in Myanmar presently, have really, I think, done us a great service today. So thank you, especially to Mathilda, who's still with us here, but to the other participants in the panel, Nim Sakong, Sayaji, Mohan, and Tinsa Shunli. I have a big task at the end of a panel of this sort. It's very hard to try and think through the most appropriate way to come at the many strands in the discussion, and to do it both with the kind of respect which I think is called for, and empathetic thought. But I've decided that the best way to try and go about offering a few concluding words is to approach the overarching topic of violence, to come back to it again, if you allow me to, through a number of key terms that came up for me in the discussions. Two of the key terms are terms that Yemohen used in his opening remarks, which struck me as not only so resonant to what he had to say, but also as speaking in so many ways to the contents of the presentations that followed. And they were determination and unexpectedness. And the other terms that I think were significant for me were novelty and creativity. There are, of course, many others I could have chosen from among, but those are the terms that I'd like to draw our attention to in closing, at least for the final remarks then from Andrew. Determination, first of all. Yemohen gave us really an instructive account of what it means to think and speak about the determination of people in Myanmar in the current moment through the experiences of his brother, through the experiences that he as a brother and that his family are having by virtue of the part that his brother is playing in the anti-dictatorship revolution at this time. And I think what he spoke to through that account of his brother's experience and his own felt experience is really the dramatic transformation, which Liv just pointed to a moment ago as a transformation that involves so many sacrifices for so many involved, leading to what really is an historically momentous moment for Myanmar, but in many ways is also, I want to argue, a globally historically significant moment. It is rare that we see anywhere in the world the degree of determined resistance to an armed takeover of the sort that we're seeing in Myanmar today. Almost nobody is going along with the terms that the military is trying to set for them. Nobody is acting as if things are as they ought to be or in any condition of normalcy. And this determination, this generalized determination that Mohan spoke of and that we heard from other speakers about as well, really gives not only a breadth, but also a depth to the resistance, which is profound and remarkable and hard to speak about, not only because it's hard for us to grasp intellectually, but I think also experientially. And yet it seems to me such a significant part of what we've heard about today. Secondarily, coupled with the determination, then comes the unexpectedness that Mohan also spoke of and that others have spoken about in different ways. Again, on the nature of the transformation of her friend who was a vegetarian and is now armed and prepared to kill for what he believes in. That is a noteworthy case in point. But the general point about unexpectedness that I want to try and make is that it's out of moments like this where people are thrust collectively into conditions that they neither expected, but nor simultaneously did they expect this generalized conclusion, in this case, that peaceful resistance, purely peaceful resistance would be impossible, that a genuinely revolutionary moment also becomes possible, becomes thinkable. And indeed that the kind of violent opposition to the military takeover in Myanmar, but also in its extent and its scope was utterly unexpected, becomes possible. So that's to say that in this moment, unexpectedness is an important word for us to dwell on and to think about, because it allows for the possibility of exactly the kinds of beginnings that make for a genuinely revolutionary moment, that there isn't a prior set of plans and preparations, but rather a realization of the possibility of beginnings that hitherto didn't exist. And there's no need in that moment to go around searching for it. It becomes evident to so many of the people involved. I think that is really also noteworthy and remarkable, historically remarkable for Myanmar in this specific moment, for reasons that we've heard about from the speakers, but remarkable on a global scale as well. The third of the terms that I mentioned at the outset is novelty, and we had a question that was raised in the Q&A and heard a lot of really interesting responses to it. What about this moment is novel? I think the general consensus is that there's not much about it which is novel on the side of the Sipdat, the military forces, the dictatorship forces. There are certain characteristics that are different from previously. I think we all agree here that we're not talking about that kind of reductive ahistorical thinking that, well, everything's just gone back to the 2000s or the 1990s. It obviously has not for any party involved, and certainly not for the military for many reasons that we've heard about. But the character of the violence, of the cruelty of which a number of the speakers spoke so eloquently, I think is significant in terms, again, of the density and the extent of it, but not really in the quality or the particular characteristics of it to a great extent. But rather, the novelty of the moment is, again, in the emergence of anti-dictatorship forces in the way they have. And the most striking characteristic of this novelty that we heard from a number of speakers about is the emergence of the PDFs, of armed groups who are prepared to engage in conflict of a sort that historically we have never seen in Myanmar previously, that totally changed the conditions in the country, that have brought the armed conflict to parts of the country that had not seen violence of this sort for decades, if not for pretty much the entirety of Myanmar's history as a post-colonial state. And so that, I think, is a tremendously significant feature of the current moment also that follows on from unexpectedness. Lastly, creativity. And this term, I think, is important not only because of the way that it emerged so strongly late in the discussion that we were having and was demonstrated also through Amathida's reading of the poem and through Thomas's discussion of the part that artwork is playing in this revolutionary moment. Significant then for the discussion that we had, but also I think then for the implications for us in thinking through how these activities, how these creative forms then contribute to the revolutionary moment that we're in presently. And why is that so? And why is it then that I appreciate this emphasis on creativity so much here? And perhaps I don't attend enough events on Myanmar as I should, but I think this is one of the first events that I've been to, which was set in terms which I would identify as essentially political terms that nevertheless took the creative potential and the creative contents of the anti-dictatorship forces seriously. And for that, I really appreciate both the role of the organizers in attending to that and also the speakers. And why then do I think it's important? The reason is that the creative impulses that speakers were identifying are not peripheral to the revolutionary moment. They're not epiphenomenal. They're integral to it. They're essential to it. Revolutionary moments are moments of creativity of the most profound sort. Indeed, it's hard to encounter conditions in which both the possibilities for creativity and the experience of it are more self-evident than in revolutionary moments. So the creativity to which our speakers were pointing our attention is something that I think perhaps for those of us who are concerned with the political contents of the conditions in Myanmar, especially something that we have to attend to much more deliberately. And in saying that, I also want to suggest that a quality of the creative actions that they were identifying that is tremendously important, both to the revolutionary moment in Myanmar, but also how we respond to it as people who are trying to think and talk and feel in our own various ways through this moment, is the quality of critique. Right? How do we engage in a form of thinking and acting which is critical in itself in response to these creative moments? Because what is critique other than the art, and I want to underscore that term in response to the discussion around creativity, the art of not being governed quite so much, not like that, not in that way, not according to those terms or methods. And I think that really is the characteristic of the revolutionary moment also, that to me is significant. So on those points, then I want to close by coming back to then the discussion around violence. And here I'm going to align myself with some of the remarks that were made by the various speakers and perhaps depart from others and insist that we do think and talk about the militaristic violence of dictatorship and the revolutionary violence of anti-dictatorship as not only as different categories of violence, but as categories that are fundamentally opposed to one another, that qualitatively are in every respect unalike. And this may be one way of me responding to questions around, well, how is it possible to prevent revolutionary violence from sliding into something which is analogous to the violence that it opposes, to insist upon us engaging in discussion around exactly what it is that makes revolutionary violence different and why in this particular moment in Myanmar it matters so much. Because if the militaristic violence of the state is, and here I have 6 or 7 aspects, I'll just mention briefly and then conclude. But if the militaristic violence of the state is compelled and compulsory, right, it's non-optional, it's conservative, it's aimed at reinforcing an existing set of arrangements. It's planned, it's repetitive and unimaginative in that as well. And it has a universal quality to it, or it claims a kind of universality. Then it is fundamentally an anti-political violence, a violence that glorifies itself in order to shut people up. Revolutionary violence of the sort that we've been talking about and hearing about by contrast has exactly those characteristics that I just mentioned. It's a determined violence that has a creative potential. It's unexpected, it's voluntary, it's novel, selective in its tactics and orientation, and therefore it's nascently political. I don't say it's political because I'm of the view with some thinkers that there isn't any such thing as essentially political violence, but it is a form of violence that opens things up to the possibility of a politics yet to come, a politics that is yet to be determined. And in that, it must therefore maintain the kind of creative qualities and potential that I was alluding to a moment ago. Hence the importance of creativity and my appreciation for the emphasis that was placed on it here. Because if those qualities are lost in the revolutionary moment, then the possibility of revolutionary violence enfolding with that to which it is opposed exists. But in that case, it's no longer revolutionary violence. It becomes something else, perhaps ironically a counter-revolutionary force within itself. So on that note, again, I want to appreciate all of the conversations that I've heard this evening, this morning in my case, and I commend all of the speakers, and especially again pay my respects and appreciation to our Myanmar colleagues for their courage and determination in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Nick, for this wise and thoughtful set of reflections that bring us towards the close of our webinar today. It falls to me to just make some closing remarks, and maybe just taking as point of departure some of your own remarks there. One of the things that has certainly struck me throughout the discussion today has been about the way violence, resistance, and art are productive and generative and transformative, and shouldn't be understood simply in terms of questions of good and evil. I was also reminded of one of my favorite theorists, actually, an anthropologist called Jean Lave, and her definition of learning, which is rather complicated, but I'll share it. She talks about learning as changed participation in changing social practice. And I think this is quite an interesting way to think about what people in Myanmar are experiencing right now. Everything is changing, everything is up in the air, and it's obliging people to change their forms of participation. We've heard so many examples of this, people making new choices, discovering new ways to act to what is going on, essentially learning as they go and responding to the situation again in creative ways. And another vocabulary that Jean Lave introduced me to was to think about the way identities, intimate identities, are formed through contentious social practice against the background of what she calls enduring struggle. And I think also that vocabulary is really, really useful for thinking around the questions that we've had on the table today. But I don't want to get into a big theoretical treatise at this point. I really just want to wrap things up. One of our intentions with this event was both to learn from each other and to illuminate what is going on in terms of forms of violence and forms of resistance, but also to mark, and as Helena said at the beginning, to mourn, in a sense, the losses that have taken place during this year. So this has been both a virtual webinar, a virtual, but also a physical and a symbolic manifestation of learning, of putting knowledge to work. But it's also been an attempt to embody and signal our solidarity with the people of Myanmar at this time. So again, I echo Nick's words of tribute to the people enduring the struggles that are going on right now. And I offer my thanks to everybody who's chosen to tune in today. It's been wonderful to have such a large audience. And my thanks to all the panelists and participants as well. So with that, I say thank you and good evening, goodbye.